First thing to tell you, just so you know this, every 20 days I have to create a work ethic grade for each one of you. All right, and a work ethic grade, you probably heard this a couple times, but again, it's DNM, which means you do not meet expectations. All right, so if you've turned in nothing, you never come, etc. That kind, and we've had that happen before. Why somebody would pay what you guys pay and then never show and not drop out is way beyond me. I don't understand that, but you know, to each their own, I guess. Then there's an ME, which is meets expectations, and that's usually what most people get. You come here, you do the work, you leave. All right. Occasionally, people go over and above the call of duty, so they get an EE, which is exceeds expectations. Now, we have already had at least one person in here who has requested possibly, getting some help from a tutor. If you are interested in possibly tutoring someone, let me know. You are not literally allowed to be in this class and tutor in the class at the same time. Does that make sense? But you can meet with people outside of class. You can meet with them electronically. You just have to keep track of your hours. You can work, I think, up to 20 hours a week, and you make $10 an hour. And if you need a tutor, that's free as well. All right? But there were a couple people I thought of approaching, and I didn't. I just figured I would do it like this. On Tuesday of next week, which will begin day 21, what I'll do is if there's no one in the conference room, I'm going to go in there at the beginning of class for about the first 15 minutes, call you in one at a time. And I will be printing out for each one of you your attendance thus far, your grades thus far. So this weekend, it's my responsibility to make sure that you've turned in or I've graded everything you've turned in. Again, if you're not sure, I talked about this before, make sure that on your all web dev homework that I've got access to it. All right, to send me an invitation, even if it's another one, that's totally fine. All right, so again, so this is what I do every day. You were all here. Mark everybody here. All right. So this is what we've done so far. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but you could pretty this up all you want. So if it's easier, just so you know, I want to make sure you get this. That, for instance, name equal viewport. Name is an attribute, viewport is its value. If I want to make sure I can really read this, I can do that. But don't split it in the middle of something in double quotes, because that can screw stuff up. All right, I've had people say to me, well, I did it and it didn't screw stuff up. Well, it could in the future. That's all I can tell you. All right, so we came in there, we added the meta tags for our description. We added the meta tag for our keyword. We changed the title accordingly. We added the link to our style sheet. All right. Then we came in here, and unfortunately when I did this for you, I forgot to put in the words. So make sure you put in home there, about there, and contact there, because otherwise all you're going to get are the 3 dots, which isn't very good. All right, so my fault. So far we've created our header. And in our header, we've created our nav. Our nav is all inside of a container div. It's got our logo, which is just we sell only mansions, WeSoM, that right now is hyperlinked. We're going to remove that underline, all right, in a bit. And that's in an H1 tag. Then we put in an unordered list. And in that unordered list, we put in a class of current, because we're going to want that one, the one that's currently there, to have a different coloring on it. All right. We link that to our home page. We put in another link. We link that to our about page, and we put in another link to our contact page. All right. That is our whole nav section. Now, we're going to actually put another section in here. What we want is at the top of our page, on our home page, we want the navigation bar, and then underneath it, we want a picture of a big mansion. All right, we could put some text with that also. I decided to just put a picture of a big mansion on it. All right. So, like I said, if you haven't done so, you have to go and bring in that image folder that I gave you and copy those images in. Otherwise, you're just going to have nothing No image there on top. All right. Now, this goes by different names, but quite often when you put this in, it's called a showcase section. Doesn't have to be called that. Again, there's nothing magical about those names. There is something magical, so to speak, about head, body, header, nav, div, h1, etc. But when we name stuff like this, we didn't have to name that nav bar. We didn't have to name that container or that logo, etc. All right? So we're in here, and we're going to create another div with an ID that's equal to showcase, because this is what we're showcasing. All right? Inside of there, we're basically sticking everything we've got in here into a container. So we're going to make another one of these div ID equals container. All right, and now that I look at that, how did we do that before? Class equal container. Good, so it should be a class. Make that class equal container. All right. We're only going to put about 4 or 5 lines in, and then we're going to go into our CSS. Okay, so that's what's in our showcase so far. Not much. Okay, what we're going to have in this showcase area are 2 things. The first thing that we're going to have is one of these pictures. Okay, we're going to have a picture in there. And at the bottom of that picture, we're going to have a hyperlink, but we don't want it to look like a hyperlink. We want it to look like a button. Okay? So we're going to put it in there, and then we're going to style the hyperlink so that it looks like a button. All right? So literally we have 3 or 4 lines to key in here. Then we're going to go into the CSS. All right. Another div, class equals, we're going to call this showcase content. And again, these names, as I keep saying to you, are arbitrary. They don't have to be called this. But I've got a showcase. This will be the content for the showcase section. So showcase content seems to make sense. Some people, when they do this, they write it, just so you know, they write it like this. Showcase content like that, and they run it together. Other people put in an underscore and do it like that. I'm just going to use a hyphen. It depends on what you're doing in the language that you're doing it. Sometimes it must be a hyphen, or it must be an underscore, or you can't use either, etc. All right? When we get into JavaScript, there's going to be certain rules that you have to follow. For instance, if you create a variable in JavaScript, you can't start it with a number. In fact, in most programming languages, when you create a variable, you cannot start it with a number. Not all, but with most of them, it's like that. Okay, so I'm in my showcase area, and in here, I'm going to put in my button. A class equals, again, we don't have to call it button, but we're going to. All right? I can keep typing here and put in my href, but it might run off the screen. So I'm going to put this on a new line. Okay? And again, right now, it doesn't look like very much. I get that. All right. Not a bad time to save, so I just saved. And if I run this, that's what I've got, because there's no CSS in it. Okay? All right. So the next thing that I am going to do is I am going to go out, and what I sent you all this morning, of course I got rid of it already, but that's okay. I put it here. was this thing that was called images. All right. So I've already unzipped it, but you can do that now. All right. Drag it over, but have it someplace where you've got it. But I should have my, so I put it here. There it is. So this is the folder right here, IMG. It has in it these 5 images. This is going to be the first person who's going to make comments on our About page. And this is going to be the second, or vice versa. I guess it doesn't matter. All right, this is the founder of the organization. I got all these pictures from Unsplash. So, you know, there's nothing special about the pictures. But I should be able to open one and then whip our way through here. So that's going to be our first person who's going to make comments. Second person who's going to make comments. That's the founder. There's the one mansion. There's the other mansion. I think that's the one that's going to go on the home page. All right? I don't remember. We'll find out in just a minute. And I believe that's, oh, and that one does too. You may not like my choice, but I went out there, literally went out to Unsplash, typed in mansions, and just picked a few out. All right? There was nothing special about what I picked out. So I'm just going to do this. Since I already have an image folder, I'm going to do a Control-A to highlight all of them, Control-C to copy. Then in my WeSoM folder, there's my images. I'm going to right mouse click, right mouse click and choose Paste. They should be in there already, but let's double check. And there they are. All right. The other thing we could have done is just not created an IMG folder and then just drag this in. Whatever's easiest for you. All right. So I'm going to start putting in the style. And hopefully, I'm looking in here because I've got a couple copies of this that I made. And hopefully the copy I made is the newest one, because if it isn't, I screwed up. But hopefully we're going to get this just fine. So open up your styles.css file right now, please. All right. We're going to start by trying to adhere to some good practices. In other words, we're going to use a little bit of documentation, so I'm going to put a couple comments in here. Plus, I'm going to try to do this in some kind of an order, rather than just randomly putting stuff out there. All right, I'm going to put stuff in different sections or whatever you want to call it. So the first thing I'm going to do is we're going to make a real simple reset. We're going to use one that actually was shown in the book. All right, but I'm just going to come in here and say, you may remember this, you may not. All right, that asterisk that's in there, the asterisk, let me get rid of that writing. That asterisk that you see right there, right here, that asterisk, the blue one, that means everything. Okay, and all we're going to do 3 things. We're going to say margin, 0, padding, 0, and then one we have not talked about, but we're going to in just a couple minutes, and that is we're going to say here box sizing, border dash box. And that may be the most important thing you learn from this period, is that. So we're going to talk about it in just a minute. But I'm going to give you a second to put that in. All right. And all I can tell you is if you're a slow typist, try to learn to type faster. If you don't know it, there's a thing that you can go to. I think it's called, it's one word, I think it's called Type Racer. typeracer.com, and you've got your own little race car, and the faster you type, you're like in a race. The faster you type, the faster your car goes. All right, and well, there's a bunch of them. There really are. There literally are several of them. But the point is, I had a student in here 3 years ago, and he's autistic. And he did fine in the program. He was a very intelligent young man, but he could not type by his own admission. He got pretty good. And I asked him how he got better. He said, I did that type racer thing that you talked about. All right, so you can do it. All right, so let's talk for a second about border box and what it does. You don't have to write this down. I just literally grabbed it from right here, from our friends at W3 Schools. What it does is if I create something, so let's say that I create something and I say that it's 300 pixels. I know pixels is an exact measurement, but I'm saying that on purpose. It's 300 pixels. Then I say, hey, in that, you've got 300 pixels. Then go and add 30 pixels of margin and 40 pixels of padding. Okay? And let's just say that the padding is just on top and the margin is just on top. Now, instead of it being 300, it's 370. Does that make sense? 300 plus 30 plus 70. With box sizing border box, it's still 300. So it doesn't add the extra stuff onto it. I've mentioned this to you before. You still can't shove 10 pounds worth into a 5-pound bag. You can't say this is 5 pixels and then try throwing 300 pixels of stuff in it. That doesn't make sense. But this is often done, and since we're doing it here in Reset, it should be available program-wide. All right? All right, so that's our first stuff. Next. I'm just going to call this, for lack of better words, main styling. And again, you're not keeping this, or I'm sorry, you're not turning this in. What you decide to call this, what you decide to put in for comments, etc., it's up to you. But I'm trying to give you some kind of a template, if you want to, that you can use as you're going on in here. All right? So, what do I want to put in here? Well, HTML body, and I'm going to explain what all this is in just a minute. But I'm going to say in here, font, family, and I'm going to keep it really simple. All right? And I'm going to say here, I think it's Sego UI, Tahoma, Geneva. You should be able to get this yourselves from, you shouldn't have to type this in. As you start typing it in, it's going to find it in Emmet. So you should just be able to hit tab, or I should say in Visual Studio will find it. So Geneva, Verdana, and sans serif. All right. And we're going to give it a line height of 1.7. Let's try rems. We'll see whether or not that works. It's not what I had, but it should work. Now, what's HTML and what's body? HTML is the whole page. Do you remember on your last test how you were told to use 80% of the page? Remember that? That's the body. The HTML covered the entire thing. The 80% plus the 10% that was on each side. So what I'm just saying is, hey, anything that might be out there, I want to use Sego UI. All right? And I don't know what that is. It was just one of the ones that I found there when it came up. And if you can't find that, use Tahoma. If you can't find that, use Geneva. If you can't find that, use Verdana. If you can't find that, virtually every computer has some kind of a serif and a sans serif. All right, so in worst case, it'll use that. Line height is basically, the way that typically line height is mentioned is, how much height do you need to put in the letter M? And normally it's set to 1 rem, but I'm setting it to 1.7. I make it a little higher. All right, so hopefully at least, so things are easier to read. All right. Now, if I take this and I go back to my site and I refresh, notice what happened. The font has changed, and since I removed all my padding and margin, everything is shoved up to the top. That might look ugly. It'll be fixed. Don't worry about it. All right? All right. Since I'm doing my main styling in here. All right. There's a chance, at least, that when I do this, I may have some hyperlinks. that are not inside of my nav bar or whatever, but just some hyperlinks someplace. So I can do styling for them if I want to. And that's what I'm going to do here. Again, let me hit enter a few times to move this up. There we go. Okay, so for those, I'm going to say the color will be 333. The advantage that you have that I don't have is after you put in the 333, you should have a little square next to it that actually shows the color. All right, you need the pound sign. When you put in pound 333 like that, just so you know, that's a shortcut. You can also say 333, 333, but if it doesn't change, as this one doesn't change, you only need 3 of them. So you can do it either way. All right? There probably is, I think it's a dark gray, I don't even remember, but there's even colors that you can use. Some people just like to use the English words. They never like to use the codes. You should get used to using the codes, because over time you're going to be tweaking colors, and you're going to be using colors that there's not probably a code for. All right, when I say codes, an English word code for. All right. The other thing we want to do too is we want to say text decoration none. Can somebody tell me, what is that doing? Taking the underline away. All right. Now, this isn't the way that I want to format these, but when you look here, you can see what I've done. All right? So the underline is off of here. The underline is off of here. But notice if I put my mouse over it, my cursor still changes to a pointer, which is what I'd want. All right? Okay. The other thing, too, is I'm going to do a little bit of stuff for my paragraphs, because we're going to put a few paragraphs in here. And I'm just going to say, give me a margin, 10 pixels, 0. Can somebody tell me what that does? Right. 10 pixels top, bottom, 0 pixels left, right. It's just a shortcut. It's like saying 10px 0, 10px 0. All right? Okay, so that's all of my main styling stuff. So now I want to come in and I'm going to create what we're going to just call utility classes. So they're classes that could potentially be used by several pages. Does that make sense? Like that container class. We're going to have a container all over the place. All right? So the advantage of doing this, and you don't have to do this, but the main advantage of doing it like this is I know now that one of the ones we're going to create here is going to be our button. And when we do this, all buttons are going to look the same. If I want a button to look different, I can give it a different ID or a different class. But I don't want that. I want all my buttons in here. There are not going to be a lot of them, but I want them all to look the same. So the first thing is dot container. And again, this should make sense to each and every one of you by now. The dot means container is a class. All right, if I used a pound sign, all right, if I'd used a pound sign, then it would be for an ID, right? Okay. So this container, I'm going to put in here margin auto. I'm telling it to basically center everything the best you can. Max width, 1100 pixels. We're going to be using pixels, and we're going to change all this stuff around later. All right. Overflow auto, padding 0, 20 pixels. I'm saying that the maximum screen size I'm ever expecting is 1100 pixels. All right? I'm telling the system if there's an overflow, in other words, if I've got too much text for my area, handle it. All right? And I'm putting in no padding on top and bottom, 20 pixels on right and left. All right. Let's see. Okay. I'm going to leave that off. I'm going to say here dot lead. What I want to do is I'm going to create a class later that's called lead. You may or may not have noticed this, but sometimes if you read text online or in a newspaper, etc., the first paragraph is bigger than the rest of the story. All right, so that's my lead paragraph. And all I'm going to say is for that one, I want it to have a font size of 20 pixels. You may or may not be aware of this, but typically the default font size is 16 pixels in most browsers. So it's going to be 1 1/4 times the typical size. I could make it humongous, but that would be kind of dumb to do that. All right, let's continue on. And I'm going to put in here my button class, .btn. All right, display inline block, font size 18 pixels, background pound 4Fs00, color pound sign 000080, padding 13 pixels, 20 pixels, no border. We'll make sure that our cursor is a pointer. All right. And one other thing that I didn't put in here. What did I? Oh, border. Now, I didn't have this in mind, but it should work just fine. Okay, so put all that in, and I'm going to take a second and explain to you everything that's in there. Remember the difference between inline elements and block level elements. All right. The reason that we're using here inline block is that so we're able to do a bunch of the styling that we're doing that would be almost impossible to do otherwise. There's inline, there's block, there's inline block, which is a combination of them, and there's none. All right, so if I want something to not show, I'm showing you the font size. The background color, that is, literally that. And it's going to be, I think it's a yellow. The color is going to be navy blue. The padding is going to have 13 pixels top and bottom, 20 pixels left and right. Buttons naturally have a border around them. All right, we don't want that border, but we do want that radius, which is going to round them a little bit. All right. And for cursor pointer, we want it to be a pointer. That's all. Now, I'm going to save. Is that pretty obvious what we just did? Okay. Now that you might not like that. That button is kind of chunky. And what I mean is it's a little bit big. I could have just put about there because it's going to go to the about page anyway. All right. So if you don't like find out about us, you can change that. The problem is right now, I'd like to set that up. I'd like to set that up so that it, when I hover over it, I'm going to change it to the reverse. So in other words, and sometimes you see this, when I hover over it, what I want to have happen here is I want the button to become blue and the writing to become yellow. Does that make sense? And to do that, I have to put that into my buttons hover class. So I've got button here. And underneath it, I'm going to put dot btn colon, no space, hover. Do not put a blank space in here. That can screw it up. It's a pseudo class. And all I want to do in here is take my background and color that I have, and I want to flip them. So instead of this, I want to take this one and put it here, and I want to take this one and put it here. Does that make sense? Let's just quickly, I'll come right back to it, but let's double check and make sure it works. So I got to refresh. See that? Again, this isn't gee whiz type of stuff, but it's stuff that you should know how to do. All right? And I can already tell this is taking longer than I thought it would. I don't care. I don't care if this takes us 3 or 4 days. Then it does. But if we do this and we get done and we use media queries and you get them, and we get done, and we use Flexbox, and you get that, you will be more than ready for your next test. That's what I'm concerned with. All right? Okay. Like I said, I know it doesn't look like much so far. Now, we are going to use a little bit of floating in here. All right? We're not going to worry about Flexbox in this one. We'll build another site next week where we'll do it all with Flexbox. All right? But since we use floating, we're going to float something to the left or we're going to float something to the right, etc. But we want to make sure when we're done floating, we clear our floats. Does that make sense? All right. So the next thing we're going to put in here is, since it's a utility class, I'm going to call it .clr. You don't have to call it that, but just short for clear. And all that's going to say is clear both. And when I put that in, if I've got any left floating or right floating, it's going to clear it. All right? Okay. I don't know why I named it this, but I did. I'm looking at my stuff and I'm like, why did I do this? This is because I should not, at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, I should not be writing code. All right? But I did, and it's fine. So I call this L heading. I don't remember what L stands for. That's an L, not a number 1. So I call this L heading. But I'm going to use the stuff I've got because I know it works. And for this L heading, I'm going to do 2 things. I'm going to set the font size to 40 pixels. And I'm going to set the color to pound 000. What's that color? That's correct. Now, again, instead of 40 pixels, I could have put 2.5 rem or 2.5 m. Does everybody get that? All right. I want this first iteration we do to not be very responsive. Why? So when we add the responsive stuff, then you'll really see why we're doing it. So we're not making this very responsive on purpose. Okay? All right. Okay. If you're working in math and you've got an axis that goes up and down and one that goes across. We talked about this, correct? What is the axis that goes up and down? Left? Is this, so when you do this, what is this axis?
That's the main axis?
No. Is it the x-axis or is it the y-axis? It's the y. So this is y, and that one is x. So y, who cares? Well, I made a couple things. I didn't really end up using them, but I just wanted to show you this. Since these are utility classes, all right, I made a couple of these called one py for padding y. And I just said padding 10 pixels 0. And then I made a couple more. I made 3 of these. So one that did 10 pixels, one that did 20, and one that did 30. So I'm just going to copy it 3 times, Make it 2 and 3 and 2 and 3. I don't even think I'm going to use these. Or if I use these, I might have used the PY3. But I'm just trying to show you that if you've got things that you're doing all the time, you might want to give them names. That way, if you decide later that instead of going 10 pixels 0, you want to go to 50 pixels 0 or whatever, you have to change them in one place, and they're changed all over. All right. So hopefully everybody has that. I'm going to move this up a little bit. Now, finally time to start doing stuff with a nav bar. All right. So all that stuff that you saw in here, everything from line 23 through line 70, so about 50 lines worth of stuff, those are utility classes. They're designed so that we're able to use them on multiple things and or on multiple pages. All right, so start doing our nav bar now. And first thing we're going to do, it's all pound nav bar, right? Because we said ID equals nav bar. So pound nav bar, get that out of there. And for the nav bar itself, background pound 000080, color pound FFFF00. Okay? What did that do? It's always easiest to just show you what it did. All right? You say, well, that's really ugly. Yeah, it is. All right? So, for example, on here, well, the color, that didn't change those the links, because the links are A tags. They're not considered regular text. All right? And so there's more that we're going to do in here is what I'm telling you. All right, so remember that that nav bar had an H1. So for that H1, we want to float that to the left. Oops. And we want to give it some padding on the top. And we'll give it 20 pixels. All right. Again, I could have made a utility class for that too, just so you know. So float left, padding 20 pixels. Kind of hard to tell, but it did move it a little bit. All right. As we go through this, you're going to see it, but I like doing it like this because you can always tell what you're working on. Is it working or is it not working? All right. So the next thing I'm going to do, whoops, nav bar, UL. It's the unordered list. All right. List style none. What is that doing? Somebody tell me, what is list style none doing? It's correct. It's putting nothing there. Remember, your list style can be, you can come up with your own, like we saw on the Travis Tritt site, when they had the stars, or you can use circle, or you can use square, or you can use disc, or you can use none. We don't want any. And since we floated this to the left, we're now floating this to the right. Did that do anything? All right. It's very hard to tell, but it's over here now. Okay? We're going to change the color in just a minute. You're going to see it in just a second. Everybody have this? I'll move this up a little, but I'll leave that last one there. All right. Now, the LIs that are in here, this stuff is already, remember, this stuff is floated already to the right. So it almost looks a little bit weird, but we're going to say for the LIs, float them to the left. The nav bar itself is floated right, the LIs are going to be floated to the left. What we want is for those, instead of being in a row format, we want them to be in a columnar format. Does that make sense? All right. Okay. Next, we want the Nav Bar ULLIA. We want to display it block. All right. We want there to be padding of 20 pixels. We want to align the text. Oops. In the center. Oops. Center. And we want the color let's see if this works. We may have to make one extra addition. It's no big thing. I want to see if this is going to work because I'm doing it differently than I did it in my notes because I'm trying to write it in what I consider to be a better way than I did it in my notes. So what does that now look like? All right, not very good. Home about content shouldn't be looking like that, but it is. I could have missed something. What we're going to do is for our nav bar, right underneath where you've got nav bar, I'm going to put in this. Pound nav bar A. All right, so that's any link, any hyperlink that's in here. I'm going to set the color there. So color to # FFFF00 like that. And by doing that there, okay, what I am able to do then is I'm able to get rid of it here. Does it really matter? Actually, it shouldn't. My guess is if I save this and come back here, it will look no different whatsoever. Oh, it brought that back. Okay. I'm not sure what's going on with this. We'll fix it. I'm not worried about it at all. All right. It'll be fixed shortly. All right. But you can see we're starting to get some rhyme and reason, hopefully, to our nav bar. Okay. So I did it in what I considered to be a decent order, starting with the nav bar, then my links, my H1, my UL, my ULLI, my ULLIA. Okay, you can usually get away with here. I probably could have just put LI and I probably could have just put A here. Why? It's more typing, but you're being specific. This is just for the unordered list as a whole. These are for the list elements. These are for the anchor tags that are in the list elements. All right. All right, two things I want to do. I want to say we're almost done here. So pound nav bar ULLIA hover and pound nav bar ULLIA current. That's the one we created. And for both those, we want the background to be set to pound FFFF00, and we want the color to be set to pound 000080. All right, and again, I'll come right back to it, but notice what changed. Why isn't anything? Well, I'll have to figure out what's going on here, but that's all correct. I'm not worried about it. By tomorrow morning, if I screwed anything up, I'll look at it tonight. We'll get it to work. I'm not worried about it. All right? So the next thing to do then is our showcase area. All right? So right here, that was our nav bar. And you can see what file between these, you can see what file's getting big. The more you want to refine and the more control you want over the page, the bigger your CSS page is going to be. In fact, this page is going to, when we get done, it's going to be about 2 to 3 times, well, 2 to 2.5 times the size it is right now. And when we create the mobile CSS file and we put our media queries in it, we're going to put that into a separate file. You don't have to, but it sure makes sense to do that, because otherwise you start getting bloat when your files just get really big when you really don't have to make them that big. So the next thing we're going to do then is our showcase area. All right. And the first thing that I want to do here is showcase. And again, you're going to have problems here if you did not add those images. Let me see if it brought the picture in. Okay, well that isn't the right size, but you get the right idea, right? All right, that is the picture of the mansion. Let's just see right now, I got height 100%, which should be fine. But if I throw in a pixel in there, so let's try throwing in 500 pixels. See what it looks like then. Okay. All right, you see the difference. Okay. I'll leave it at 500 pixels at least for now. We got to move that button over. I'm not sure why, but it should be down here. It's going to be fixed. All right. So we now have this, and we've got these. They're screwed up, as you can see. The about and the contact should both be right there, and something's goofed up. I'll look at it after class. I want to keep going. All right. So we've got that now. Okay. So what else do we have? Well, let's see. So we came in, and for our showcase, again, it's an ID. Let's double check. ID equals showcase. That's where we are right now. All right. Now notice we still have that class of containers, so everything we did in our utility class will apply to this. All right, but you may or may not remember that an ID is more powerful, so to speak, than a class. So if the ID overwrites anything that was in the class, it will overwrite it. All right? If I'd had two classes here, so if I had class hello after this, and if hello had overwritten something that was in container, it's the one that's last will be the one that you apply. So if I said hello container, container would be the more powerful, so to speak. If I said container hello, then hello would be the more powerful, so to speak. All right. So let's see. Pound showcase dot showcase content. All right, this may end up looking really goofy, and I may have to, this might be why the height might have to go back to 100%, so bear with me if I do this and it looks really goofy when I get done. Just one thing though, because I didn't mention it. We're using a background image. Remember you were supposed to do that on your last test and very few of you did? So it's URL, then in parentheses you put the path to the URL. It's in the images folder. I'm currently in CSS. So I'm currently in another folder. So I've got to go ... which moves me up, /image. So I'm in the image folder, and I'm telling it to find mansion01.jpg. And I'm telling it by default, even if it's a huge image, if you were looking at it on an unbelievably wide screen, it will repeat. So I'm telling it, I don't want it to repeat. I only want it to show once. I want it to be in the center of the screen, and I want it to cover whatever area it's in. That's the center cover. All right? So let's look at this. Like I said, it may look screwy now. We'll see. Nope. Well, now at least it moved the button down here. That's good. It's not where I want it, but that's good anyway. All right? Now, for the H1 that's in there, I don't know if we put an H1 in or not. We'll see. If we didn't, we'll put one in. Showcase dot and we'll put M's in there. That's fine. Now, I'm putting these in, and you'll see why in just a second. I'm going to go back, and where I've set this right here, that height, I'm going to try changing that to 100% and see if I'm going to get the effect that I want here. So let me save, go back here. There my button. See how my button now? You see this? My button is inside of here. All right. So right now, the only thing that I want to fix. See, this is how it'll look at 100% right now. The only thing I want to fix is these, and I'm not sure what's going on there, but we'll fix it. All right. Now, and I'm going to leave this up there. Okay. But what I want you to understand is this. Take a look on here. This says, in my showcase, I have a class that's called Showcase Content. So I want all this stuff to apply to everything that's been set up in the Showcase class, Showcase Content. Now, I have an H1 in there, so just the H1 I want to be that size. I could change the color, I could change the font type, I could change anything. So that's only for any H1s I have in there. Now, look at this, please. There is nothing in there. Originally, I had text in there. Did you hear me? I tried playing around with different colors. Nothing looked good on that. So I said, well, it's the image. So I went into the image, and I tried to play around with the coloring. It still didn't look good, so I said, okay, let's get a different image. I couldn't find an image I liked that had basically a whitish background so I could write over it. But the reason I'm telling you all this is if I decide later I want to go back in and add an H1 tag in there or any tag, it could be an H2, it doesn't matter. Or if I come back later and I decide that I want to add a paragraph, I can do that. All right? This is just for my button. And this, by saying margin bottom 30%, and by having that height here at 100, let's take a look and see exactly what that did. So I'm going to, you don't do this, but just let me do it. You watch, I guess. But I'm going to comment this out. All right, and I'm going to come back into here and refresh. See how right now the button basically is kind of stuck to the bottom? All right. And it'll look a little bit better, not much, but again, we've got other content that we have to put in. I am purposely going through this slowly. All right? So it may not look, you can see there's a little bit there now. If I wanted to really move it up, I could have made it 100 pixels there, and that would have moved it up. We could put it up here someplace. And again, you'll see that. So if I go back up here, I don't know what that would be. I would have to eyeball it. Maybe 175 pixels, not 1750. That wouldn't be good. But something like that. And now when I refresh, you can see now it's in the pool, so to speak. Is that better? Do I want it up here someplace? That's up to you. And as a developer, or if you're developing it for somebody, you want to ask them. Does that all make sense? All right, so we've gone through and we've literally written, I've got 281 lines of CSS, and we have written about half of that, pretty close to half. All right, and after the showcase here, we're going to put basically our main area in. All right, and that won't take long, but I promised you before that as we go through this, I didn't want to take up too much of your time. So I'm stopping right here. We'll just continue on with this tomorrow. Is this helping? All right, I mean, that's the idea behind it. Some of you, I think, boom, you just catch on. Some other people struggle at first. Everybody's different. And just because you struggle doesn't mean that you're not going to do well in here. Take my word for it. All right? Any questions on anything we've done? I will let you know, I guarantee you this, tomorrow morning, whatever the heck the problem is with this, I'm going to fix it. All right? But right now, and you should know this, I'm going to get an error if I go here, I don't have an about page. I'm going to get an error if I go here, because I don't have a contact page. This is just going to keep me where I currently am, and so is this. All right? This is also going to give me an error, because again, I don't have an about page. All right? Tomorrow we should have no problem finishing this up and probably also writing the about page. Like I said, I want to give you time. You learn somewhat by doing this, but you learn the most when you're making mistakes on your own. So please look at it not so much on a test, but if you're working on a homework assignment and see, well, that's screwed up, fix it. All right? That's how you're going to learn. So there's no questions, and the rest of the period is yours. I had a problem with the first go-round of taping in here, so that's why I started over and I went over some of the stuff again. So this is going to be the tape for today if you want to go back and take a look at it. All right? And like I said, I'm going to take a quick look at, in fact, let me pause this.